So I'm really thrilled to be here. I'm really happy to be in a room where people talk about the failure of capitalism and that our common resources should not be privatized. Now, I'm the last speaker of the day. I know it's kind of rough for people. I'm really impressed that I think everyone is still here. That's really amazing. So I had a really strange experience in May of this year, and I had a first-hand glimpse of what the energy companies really have in mind for us, along with the financial service companies. I went to a corporate meeting in Dubai that was called the First Summit on Oil, Gas, and Water. And this was, I kind of went undercover, but it was a 2-day strategy meeting on how to make money from produced water, and that really means polluted water or the wastewater from fracking. And it was a meeting between the oil and gas industry and the water and technology companies about how they could join forces for profit. And it was a really scary meeting because let me tell you, there was no discussion of natural gas as a transition fuel. And it is clear that they intend to drill for every last drop of oil, no matter what the effect on our global climate or water resources is. And they discussed huge amounts of water. There is a company that is cleaning produced water in Pennsylvania, one of the states that's being fracked, called Aquatech, and a person from that company gave a presentation. They say that 2.4 billion gallons of water are being polluted and used every day in the U.S., 5.7 gallons used by the oil and gas industry globally. That's a total of 8.1 billion gallons of water every single day. That's enough to cover the entire United States with a fraction of an inch of water. And somebody from GE Power added that it's growing by 8% every year, the amount of water being used. So that really leads us to fracking, as Bob described, that uses a lot more water than the traditional natural gas recovery. And I think that the upside about fracking, if there is one, is that it is really generating a global movement. On September 22nd, there were actions in 20 countries, over 200 actions. And I'm going to talk specifically about what's going on in the U.S. since, as Bob mentioned, this is where fracking has really taken off. And I think everybody who is here from another country can take this message home about what's happening because of fracking in the U.S. Now here, it's really being driven by all of the money. It's petroleum and gas company money, and it's financial services money. They've spent 2/3 of $1 billion lobbying over the last 5 years. And there's just immense lying that's going on. I mean, one of the lies is that it's safe because they've been fracking since 1949. And as Bob mentioned, in reality, this is something that's only been going on the last couple of years. Halliburton developed this technology really since the turn of the century. Dick Cheney helped negotiate a giant loophole so that fracking is exempted from our national environmental laws. So we've seen an increase in shale gas in the U.S. Over the last 10 years from 1% to 20% of our energy supply. And as Bob also mentioned, what happens is that the drillers inject water chemicals and silica sand under very high pressure, and it breaks up the rock. They go down a mile vertically and then as much as a mile horizontally. We kind of describe it as using a giant pipe bomb underground. There's also a story around the silica sand. It's that white sand that has to be processed. It's being mined in states like Minnesota and Wisconsin. This is a very strong sand. It's a propping agent that keeps the fractures in the rock open so that the gas can be released. And breathing this carcinogenic dust threatens the health of the people who mine it and the people who frack with it. And then there are the fracking chemicals. We had a congressional investigation here. There are about 750 different chemicals that can be used in this process. Things like benzene, formaldehyde, toluene, and the companies don't have to disclose which chemicals that they're using to the public. So something has to happen to all that chemically laden water, and depending on the geology of the site, 30 to 70% of the water that's injected underground returns to the surface as wastewater. This is the produced water that they were talking about at that summit. And nobody really knows what happens to all of that water deep underground. But we do know that when the underground rock formations are blown apart, that some of the gas and the water and the chemicals migrate into aquifers and into drinking water sources. And these wells also often experience ruptures or blowback that spills the wastewater into the surface. ProPublica has identified more than 1,000 cases of water contamination near drilling sites. One of the methods that they use for getting rid of this wastewater is deep injection disposal, where they send it deep underground, and this has been documented to be associated with earthquakes in places like Ohio. Now, another common method of disposal is to send this wastewater to local municipal treatment plants, which is really unbelievable because these standard wastewater treatment facilities don't have the technology to get rid of the radioactivity or all of the chemicals in this wastewater. We know that Pennsylvania's oil and gas wells have produced 19 million gallons of toxic wastewater that contained radioactive elements, and we know that the state sent half of that to public sewage plants. There's now a voluntary order from the state government. The companies can voluntarily not send it to wastewater treatment plants, but we don't really know what's happening in Pennsylvania. Fracking also causes serious air pollution, and it releases all sorts of carcinogenic materials into the air because the volatile organic compounds mix with the exhaust from all the heavy duty equipment that's on these well sites, and it forms ground level ozone and smog. A really good example of this is Wyoming. Now, Wyoming is a very low population state out in the American West. There are very few people there, but there are 27,000 wells. Today, Wyoming doesn't meet the Clean Air Act standards, and it's not because of automobiles and power plants. Exposure to smog is linked to all sorts of different kinds of cancers and health effects. Now, despite all of these negative impacts, the industry is counteracting all of this by hyping the economic benefits. And you know how this works. When industry wants to do something that's not really in the public interest, they just trot out the issue of jobs. But when you look at the details, the benefits are really outweighed by the negative effects on health, natural resources, and the quality of life. And most of these benefits, these economic benefits, just aren't true. Energy companies based somewhere else don't typically buy the drilling and fracking supplies from local businesses, and the high-paying jobs typically go to transient workers from traditional oil-producing states like Texas. They're not coming from Pennsylvania or Ohio, or states that are now experiencing new fracking. And most of these workers aren't going to be represented in the U.S. by unions. According to the U.S. Bureau of Labor and Statistics, less than 8% of the workforce in mining, oil, and gas sector were represented by unions in 2011. And further, many of these companies pursuing fracking are headquartered in right-to-work states like Oklahoma and Texas. And Oklahoma-based Chesapeake is a really good example of this. It's the largest company that's fracking in the U.S., and according to its government filings, it has 13,000 employees, of which 149 were union members. Range Resources is another company. It's based in Texas. It reported that as of January 1st, 2012, none of its almost 800 full-time employees were union members. These numbers are very hard to come by, though. The number of jobs that are going to be created, it's really highly exaggerated. My organization hired an economist to look at this widely used report on the job potential in New York. And this report projected that there would be 63,000 total jobs. Our analysis identified and corrected for all of the inaccuracies and methodological flaws, and it turned out that there would be only 6,600 jobs, 0.1% of projected employment in New York in 2018. Now, in general, the illusion of widespread economic benefits from drilling and fracking relies on basic facts about the oil and gas industry. When oil and gas companies move in to access shale oil in a new region, much of the spending and the economic multiplier effect happens out of state. It happens somewhere else where the companies are headquartered. Most of the high-paying jobs go to non-unionized, and they go to transient workers. It takes only about 1 year to prepare, drill, and frack a shale gas well. And about 98% of the employment that's associated with each well occurs during the pre-production stage. This means new wells must be drilled and fracked each year just to sustain the industry's jobs, leading to a landscape that's peppered with oil and gas wells. And while the industry may stay in an area for a decade, the drilling and fracking jobs and any of the associated local spending on goods and services move from town to town, resulting in localized short-term boom and bust cycles that are harmful in the long term to local communities. Fracking is also very dangerous to the health of workers, and the AFL-CIO and the United Mine Workers of America and the steel workers came together in May to call upon the Occupational Health and Safety Agency in the U.S. to develop rules that would reduce worker exposure to silica dust, those fine particles that are generated from fracking. And actually, widespread drilling and fracking may be a net loss to local economies. New wells bring fleets of trucks that crowd and damage rural roads and carry potentially hazardous wastewater. Communities bear the cost of repairing the water or repairing the wear and the tear in the local roads. The Pennsylvania Department of Environmental Protection, where there's been so much fracking in Pennsylvania, they say that it requires 1,000 heavy-duty truck trips to build a well. Noisy drills operate 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So the scenic vistas are destroyed. They're replaced with gas wells. This lowers property values. It harms tourism. And really, you're making the rural countryside into an industrialized factory. And we really need to keep in mind that in the U.S., the fracking frenzy has almost nothing to do with the actual energy or with economic security. The fracking industry has actually created a Ponzi scheme by overhyping the promise of shale gas in an effort to recoup their huge investments in leases and drilling. When the wells don't pay off, the firms end up scrambling to mask their financial troubles with these convoluted off-book accounting methods that look a lot like the subprime mortgage meltdown. The primary profit in fracking comes not from selling the gas itself, but from buying and flipping the land, these leases that contain the gas. Chesapeake is now the largest leaseholder in the United States, owning drilling rights to some 15 million acres. That's an area more than twice the size of one of our states, Maryland. The company has financed their land grab with junk bonds and complex partnerships and future production deals. And they've created a really highly leveraged, deeply indebted company that has a lot in common with Enron. Further, we hear a lot of lies about energy independence and keeping the price of gas low. But regardless of where the oil is produced and sold, the price of oil is set on the global market. This globalization means that drilling and fracking for oil has nothing to do with its price in the country where it's produced. It's also really important, I think, in our discussion on energy democracy to put fracking in the larger context with the ongoing attempt to financialize nature. As you all know in this room, financial interests have determined that trading money, risk, and related financial products outperforms actually making things. And the financialization of nature reduces the value of water and other life-giving resources to these exchangeable financial instruments. It increases the role of the financial services industry, and it's a way of organizing society that places the financial sector in charge of our economy and our natural resources. So the financialization of nature, and I want to talk about this because of the amount of water that's being used in fracking, it really follows upon the commodification, the privatization, and the marketization of common resources like water. So commodification turns this inherent value of water or some other resource into a market value, and then that enables it to be bought and sold on the market, and then privatization transfers the control and management of this resource from the public to private ownership, and then these commodities can actually be priced and a market can be created for them. And at that point, financialization acts upon the commodity as an asset and applies all of these different financial instruments to it, like water pollution credits. We're seeing this trading of water pollution credits being promoted worldwide, water future contracts, and water derivatives. Now, what I saw at that summit on oil, water, and gas is that the top echelon of the water companies, the financial services industry, and the energy companies, they want water scarcity. They want scarcity of all of our resources. But to the truly cynical, scarcity makes water more precious. It makes their technologies for companies like Dow or the desalination companies or the companies like Aquatech that are cleaning this wastewater, it makes those technologies more valuable. These corporate heads want water scarcity. And so in the end, fracking is really good for business. It's good for the oil and gas industry, and it's good for the water technology and services industry. And if you think I'm exaggerating, I just want to end by reading a quote. Many of you may have seen this quote, but I think this is the evidence of what we're facing in the future if we let the financial of nature go through. This is a quote from William Bouter, who's the chief economist for Citigroup. He wrote this in preparation for the Rio Plus 20 summit in a long essay that he wrote. And it really gives us a clear view of a world where energy and food companies compete for water. He said, "I expect to see a globally integrated market for fresh water within 25 to 30 years. Once the spot markets for water are integrated, futures markets and other derivative water-based financial instruments, puts, calls, swaps, both exchange-traded and over-the-counter, will follow. There will be different grades and types of water, just the way we have light, sweet, and heavy sour crude oil today. Water as an asset class will, in my view, become eventually the single most important physical commodity-based asset class, dwarfing oil, copper, agricultural commodities, and precious waters. So there's no doubt that we are facing a really draconian scheme, and I think it's time for all of us to join together and put aside these trading schemes like cap and trade. We need to say no to the financialization of nature. And I was really taken by something that was written in the Resist, Reclaim, and Restructure paper. And I thought that it was something that we could use in our fracking movement, which the fracking movement, at least in the US and I think in several countries around the world where it's taking off, where fracking is being discussed, places like South Africa, many places in Europe, Argentina, is that people at the grassroots level are looking at these impacts and educating themselves, and they don't want this. They want to fight for the world that we want, not this world where you negotiate for the best that you can get. And I think that we can talk about energy democracy, and on page 39 it talks about, in this document that was circulated, it talks about making 4 points. Making private marketized energy companies public, restoring public utilities to their original principles of public service, and reasserting the right to develop socially owned, fully unionized, renewable-based energy systems. And I would add energy efficiency technologies as well. I think we can talk about these things. We can talk about energy democracy, and we need to just get out of our silos and stop speaking the language of the corporatized green economy, which I know is going to be discussed tomorrow. And if we get together and organize at the grassroots level and make these abstract arguments something that really appeals to people in their communities, we can win. We can win against these bastards. So let's get together and organize.